Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant Podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. So, as some of you may know, we've been just steroidally juicing up our contributors, contributing writers section to the Dispatch. It was a major strategic change about how we thought about doing these things. Figured we would go out and sort of get the best of people who were generally philosophically aligned, and I don't mean necessarily ideologically aligned. I mean like caring about facts, caring about data, caring about telling the truth, not being partisan. You can be left of center or right of center, or not politically ideological at all, and be one of our contributors. And to that point, when we announced that Emily Oster of Brown University it was coming on board as a contributing writer, the giddiness, particularly around a whole subculture of dispatch and dispatch related young moms, was just over the top. And so for those of you who don't know, obviously the most important thing possible to say about Emily Oster is that she's a dispatch contributor, but she's also a professor of economics at Brown, and she's the founder and CEO of Parent Data, a data-driven guide to pregnancy, parenting, and beyond. We'll put links to all that stuff in the show notes. She's New York Times best-selling author. His books include Expecting Better, Crib Sheet, The Family Firm, and The Unexpected. Emily Oster, welcome to the Remnant.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be writing for the Dispatch. And yeah, happy to chat.
Okay, so there are a whole bunch of different directions we can go in this, but given what you've been writing of late, and given that, as amazing as it is, it feels to me like the Robert F. Kennedy Tylenol causes autism thing was undercovered, right? It was like one of these things that was very well covered, and people were talking about it for about 24 to 36 hours, and then just
at most 48, and then we just were like moved on.
Yeah. So why don't you? It's fine to cover some of the territory that you've already written about for us, but like, just what the hell was that? What do you think about it?
So the beginning of this is a claim or sort of promise at the beginning of the summer that the administration, that the RFK parts of the administration were going to find the answer to why autism has gone up, and they were going to do it by September. And they said that back in April. It is widely understood that diagnoses of autism have gone up a lot over time. There are parts of that where we understand why, having to do with diagnosis, and then pieces of it that we don't understand. This is a hard problem. People have worked on it, etc. They sort of decided, like, okay, we're going to come up with an answer to this. And then September, in my view, September was waning. And it was like, oh, we got to do a press conference about this. And I think what I maybe expected out of that, I think what a lot of people expected out of that was a kind of standard anti-vaccine press conference, which, is a talking point they've had for many years. They've been they do not like that. They do not like vaccines. RFK Jr., I think, genuinely believes that vaccines cause autism, despite a tremendous amount of evidence to the contrary. I think the only way I can understand his behavior is that he is really a sort of true conspiracy theory believer in this particular thing. But then at this press conference, they kind of came out of course, they mentioned vaccines. You got to get a little anti-vaxxer in there, but they basically came in with sort of two other things. One was a discussion of a particular medication that might help improve autism symptoms. We can talk about that if you want. I thought that was kind of interesting. And then the thing that got much more airtime and much more attention was the claim that Tylenol usage during pregnancy is a contributing factor to childhood autism. And I think that is not a new claim. It's certainly not something that people in this space have not heard before. But I don't think anyone expected to hear it quite in that strong a statement. And certainly what the president said, which was far beyond even what RFK was willing to say at that press conference, was kind of way, way out there. So that's where we find ourselves.
So, and a bunch of people made this point, including my colleague Nick Catoggio. Like, part of about the Tylenol part of it is that the damage may not just be. Tylenol's stock price is not my primary concern.
It's not my primary concern.
But because the only thing that was established, as I understand it, is there's some modest correlation.
Yeah.
But the correlation could be a lagging indicator rather than a leading indicator insofar as we know that fevers are really bad for fetuses. And so expected pregnant moms who take Tylenol are probably taking it to combat a fever. So yeah, there's an association there, but it's the cause and effect. Just no one's nailed that at all, right?
There are actually a lot of reasons to doubt the causality of this. One is that if you look just at the demographics of who's taking Tylenol or the other, and in many of these correlational studies, I want to be clear, like the associations only show up when people are taking quite a lot of Tylenol. I mean, not like an unreasonable abusive amount, but people taking Tylenol more than 28 days during the pregnancy. So these are people who are treating some kind of, is it chronic pain? Is it chronic headaches? Is it, a set of long-term illnesses, whatever it is? That is a group that's quite different than people who are not taking Tylenol, not taking these medications at all. They're just different. And you could imagine some of those differences involve, neurodivergence of mom, for example, which of course would potentially drive autism, a disease which we know has an enormous genetic component. So that's like one issue. And then the other issue is we actually have reasonably good evidence that compares, within sibling groups where one sibling was exposed to more acetaminophen prenatally than the other, and you don't see the associations there. Like if you look at those data sets, if you don't adjust, if you don't compare within siblings, you do see the effect. But then when you adjust to compare the siblings, you don't see the effect. So actually it doesn't look like this correlation is causal. I think we have like, not only is it not obvious it would be causal, I think it is in fact fairly clear it is not causal. But I actually think there's a different piece of this that's sort of interesting, which is even if you believed the correlational data, even if you said, I don't like sibling studies, I don't like, I think this correlational data is compelling. There are two things to know. One is that the effect is very small. So, autism diagnosis rates have gone from like 1 in 150 to 1 in 31 over the past 20 years. And the increase in autism risk associated with, not caused by, but associated with acetaminophen use in pregnancy is like 1 percentage point or something. So it's like some very small impact. And the share of women taking acetaminophen during pregnancy is probably slightly declined over time based on the sort of limited data we have. So there's no chance that this explains basically any of the trend, even if it were true in the cross section. So there's just like a lot of reasons to think that this is not neither an important or probably even a real factor in this diagnosis.
So, as someone who was, at National Review for 20 years and was once fairly in the mainstream of American conservatism, I've disliked Robert F. Kennedy for a very long time. And the reasons I've disliked him have not changed. Even though he's political, even though he's
to your side, but you still don't like him,
right? Well, and I'm sort of politically homeless at this point. But part of there's the crack pottery, right? And and we don't have to get the sins of the Kennedy family dragged into this, but there's also there are a couple of people I sort of trust who've been leaning into the fact that people forget he's a trial lawyer. Yeah. And that he came from, he had all of those cases, which I think were quackery cases, but he stood to make money from them about, cell phones causing cancer, power lines, all of those sorts of things. EMFs. He comes from that community. And one of the things I really dislike about the worst actors in that world is they're always attributing greed to other players. Right. But like your family doctor, your normal OBGYN or whatever, they don't make any money from prescribing Tylenol by any means. But the case they were making is that this in some ways is a sop to the trial lawyers who are going to bring these kinds of cases against Tylenol. I mean, do you think that's a big part of it, a little part of it, not at all part of it?
I think it is a part of it in maybe a more complicated way than that. So there's certainly a piece of this because they sort of cited, I think their like strongest data expert claim for this is based on a review paper where the lead author is the dean of the Harvard School of Public Health. And that review paper kind of pulls together a bunch of these observational studies and like averages them, which is the thing people do. And then they like think it's going to make their problems better by averaging a bunch of crummy studies together. This drives me nuts. But anyway, so this is a review paper.
Polling, right? I mean, that's the theory behind polling averages.
I think it might work better for polling than for, but anyway, it's like we can go into like how biases, like you cannot average out a bias if every bias is the same.
Fair.
Okay. So anyway, they have this study, and it's sort of authored by this guy, the dean of the Harvard School of Public Health, which seems to be fair, seems like a person who would have some expertise, but it turns out is a person who is, among other things, been paid to be an expert witness in a class action suit against the maker of Tylenol. And so, is that like, would that guy say he is biased? I'm sure he would say that he is not biased. But I will say that, he has a strong incentive, a pretty clear, strong incentive to have written that paper in the first place and to have this view. So how much is kind of like the administration themselves are sort of in bed with these trial lawyers and are trying to help them? I'm not sure, but it's pretty clear, this lawsuit thing is like overlaying some of this discussion.
Just since we brought up autism and people are concerned, I have friends who have kids who are on the spectrum. I think a lot of people aren't that many degrees separated from autism. And I have some friends who are absolutely convinced it's associational mating, that when you get crazy high IQ moms and crazy high IQ dads, particularly who may have been vaguely on the spectrum but highly functioning, so that like it didn't really notice, you're just sort of compounding it. That feels like it explains some of the cases I know, but I don't know that it's possible it could explain all of them or even a majority of them. So what are your hunches about where it's coming from?
So first of all, I think, we think of this increase as enormous because it is in the sort of diagnosed rates, it is enormous. But it's quite important to remember that a very large share of that increase that we see is just an increase in diagnosis and labeling. Right. So sort of like there are a bunch of pieces of that. One is we just started labeling a bunch of things as autism, which used to be called something else. The other is a change in sort of standard screening behavior. So it used to be that there wasn't any standard screening. And then, at some point the AAP introduced kind of a standard approach to screening kids where sort of everybody should be screened for autism, which is good. Like that's not a bad thing, but that means we're recognizing a lot of sort of more mild, later developing, less typical cases of autism. There are way more diagnoses now in girls than there used to be because they tend to present differently. There's also a lot of incentives in the school system to have this particular diagnosis as opposed to some other diagnosis because it's just an easy way to qualify. Not easy, but like it's the sort of straightforward path into an IEP or a 504, whatever are the things you're getting. So there's a bunch of reasons why the sort of diagnosis rates have gone up. That explains, it's very hard to tell, maybe something between like 60 and 90% of the increase. So, potentially quite a lot. So now we're talking about a much smaller increase that is actually potentially a real symptomatic increase, and we're looking for explanations. So that narrows the scope of the problem. And I think it means something like what you described could be a more important factor. I think there's a few of those factors. So one is just parental age. We know that as parents age, autism rates, everything goes up, and that's happened over time. I think the assortative mating story is a very interesting one, and a very difficult one to quantify, although it lines up with our sense that autism has a very important genetic component, although the actual details of the genetics are not well understood. But you could easily imagine, that kind of crossing multiple potentially risk factors together might therefore contribute to higher diagnosis rates.
I also think, and again, I don't know if this is a 1% of the issue or a 20% of the issue kind of thing, but in some ways I feel like it's a little bit like homosexuality, which is that when we lifted the stigma on being gay, a lot more people revealed themselves as gay. The nature of sort of the information economy and the shrinking of nuclear family, I think there are a whole bunch of factors about it. being autistic was the kind of thing that families hid or were ashamed of, or that people didn't want, everyone wanted to be normal. And now there's this, like, if you're high functioning, it's kind of seen as a superpower kind of thing for like Silicon Valley types.
Right.
And so you just see more of it. It's like when you learn a word for the first time, all of a sudden you start hearing it all over the place. I think there's some of that going on.
For sure. I mean, I think one of the things that we could be doing better, in my view, in the data is trying to focus some of the discussion or a sort of understanding on what have we seen in changes in what we'd call profound autism, or, you know, like sort of autistic characteristics that are not, you know, effectively Asperger, you know, what we used to call Asperger's. So things we're really like, there's a much, in some ways, a stricter definition or a definition that has been more consistent over time. You know, my sense is that diagnoses in there have gone up a bit, but certainly nothing like the overall diagnosis. I wonder if there's scope for sort of focusing on trying to understand that as kind of, that is a real increase in symptoms and increase in sort of prevalence of the symptom pattern, which might help us then isolate, you know, what's going on beyond the, you know, changes in labeling, changes. And I'd put what you describe in this effectively screening thing, you know, people saying, oh, now I see, like, even adults saying, you know, well, now I see like this characteristic of symptoms. Actually, like, I just thought I was kind of socially awkward. There's a name for that. And, you know, maybe that's helpful to name it, you know, maybe it's not, but at any rate, it's different than saying, you know, all of a sudden there's more of it.
All right. So we should move off of autism, because
we are
contrary
not.
to the expectations of a lot of the listeners, we're not going to solve it right now.
Really? But we have like we have a little time left.
We do. Let's take out the,
we're going to do it by October.
Our pens and legal pads. That's right. I bring this up just because you kind of remind me of my mom in a very specific way. My mom used to be the sort of den mother to a bunch of younger moms when, you know, like, and when they would start, mostly Jewish, but start neurotically freaking out about hyper safety issues and all that kind of stuff, my mom would say, she was famous for saying this, do any of you read the New York Post? They find newborn babies in dumpsters that have survived for like 3 days. You can leave the room for a half hour, you know? And it just, by what you said, say, don't put your baby in a dumpster. But the point is that they're more durable creatures than new moms tend to think they are. Point of fact, Sarah Esger loves this story. My mom was a professional journalist, and she went to go interview George Papard. I don't know if you remember him, at Sardi's in New York in the late 60s, and checked my brother in the coat check in the bassinet, and just gave it to the coat check ladies and said, and had a couple of martinis, then went back, gave the ticket, got her baby back, and whatever. So different generation. Anyway, I bring all of that up because you are a calming force for a lot of moms who freak out about stuff. So, like, we could just sort of start at 30,000 feet. Like, what are like some of your major do's and don'ts for moms who tend to be a little too I don't want to use the word neurotic, but hyper vigilant,
anxious.
That's the word I'm looking for.
So I tend to start, like, here's what I think is hard for people. They hear, and this is true, like, the first 3 years of your kid's life are incredibly important for setting them up for success. And that is in some ways a true statement.
Mm-hmm.
And then they take that to, like, if I don't have a spreadsheet to rotate the toys, my kid's going to be a failure as an adult.
Yeah.
And that is a real thing people have, which is spreadsheets of toys, where they want to make sure their kid isn't doing too many toys out at the same time, you know, and they like have a spreadsheet, they rotate, whatever, keep track of it. And so the question I have is, like, how do I help someone understand that, like, it can both be true that the first 3 years are important and that you don't have to have the toy spreadsheet? And the thing that I will start with is saying, like, well, what is important? When we say the first 3 years are important, like, what does that mean? And how do we know that that's important? And the answer is that we know because when kids have adverse childhood experiences, we know that that translates later to, worse outcomes. And so
I assume nutrition is like number one, right?
So what can you give your kid? The things you can give your kid are a safe place to sleep every night, enough to eat, and someone to be paying attention and like giving them, like loving them basically. And not yelling all the time, and sometimes reading books. And those are kind of the things. That's kind of what we mean by like the first 3 years are really important. And it's important to remember that a lot of kids don't get that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're having these conversations in particular groups of people who are trying to talk about, toy rotation, they're not exposed to a lot of what is happening in the world where kids are not having a safe place to sleep, not having enough to eat, or not having the right things to eat, not having someone who is paying attention. Like all of those things are happening. We should be thinking about them. We should be focusing on them for policy. We should be trying to improve those lives. However, once you have done those things, which virtually everybody who is asking me these questions has done, you are like 98 to 99% of the way there. And that's it. And then most of the other stuff that you're asking about, it's kind of irrelevant. Like you could do it, you could not do it. You daycare, you nanny, you stay at home, you like go to the park, don't go to the park, go to music class, don't do a music class, all the toys, not a lot of toys. All this stuff is basically totally irrelevant. But I think it is important to sort of frame for people, like, it's not that this isn't important. It's just that the things you're talking about are really very marginal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the low-hanging fruit is very low-hanging and very
low-hanging
obvious.
fruit is very low-hanging, and still some people cannot, do not get that, and that is very unfortunate, but the low-hanging fruit is low-hanging.
So I don't think that so my daughter is 22, so whatever we screwed up in her upbringing, it's baked in.
It's
right?
over.
I think she's on a 3-state killing spree right now. I don't know if this is still a thing. It was a huge thing in the 80s and 90s in sitcoms and among family friends, and then a little bit when we had a baby. Is Ferberizing. Is Ferberizing still a huge...
Sleep training, sure.
Yeah, it's like basically leave it alone.
Letting your kid to,
cry all night.
Totally. It's not that you don't cry all night. They go to sleep. Jonah, come on.
My daughter... Okay. I have a well-formed theory that babies were supposed to gestate for 12 months, not 9.
And yours was 9.
And so she was pissed for the first 3 months out.
She wasn't ready.
Yeah. So she cried all the time.
Okay.
Yeah. But regardless of whether we tried to Ferberize her, she just cried.
She just cried all the time. Yeah.
But
Ferberizing is still a thing.
And so do you have a strong opinion on it one way or the other?
I do.
Okay.
I think that, so people now will more commonly call this cry it out. Ferber is like one method. There's like a Weiss blue. There's different methods, but it's sort of all this general thing of like letting your baby cry, not at birth, but sometime around 4 to 6 months, letting them cry for some period of time so they can learn to fall asleep by themselves. I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this can improve kids' sleep and that it can improve parents' sleep and parents' mental health. There is conversely no evidence that it leads to negative attachment outcomes, which is something people hear a lot online. I don't think it's necessarily for everyone. So there are like pediatrics practices, which will tell everybody, like, basically you have to do this or your kid will never sleep. I don't think that's well supported by the data either, but this is a tool people should have in their toolbox. And for a lot of families, it's going to turn out to be an effective way to improve their functioning.
So obviously you care a lot about the data. So what is something or some things, you can put a number on it, that the conventional wisdom all says one thing and the data says something very, very different?
I think there's very little in that category, actually. I mean, I think one place where I think the data is nowhere near as strong as maybe it's not conventional wisdom, but as you would hear, is in the case of breastfeeding. So this comes up a lot. The kind of rhetoric, at least in the US, around breastfeeding is incredibly strong.
Mm-hmm.
People are told like breast is best. Breast is like, don't you want to give your kid the best start? Like they're going to be, they're going to be stupid and fat if you don't do this. I mean, this is like it's quite extreme claims. And one thing that's interesting, like to nerd out a second on the data, is that's actually gotten much like those claims have ramped up and up and up and up and up over time. If you look at the sort of reports that come out of like the AAP about the benefits of breastfeeding, they kind of start with something in like the 70s, which sort of sounds like you might like it, like it could be fun, and then it sort of ramps into like, you know, it prevents your baby from dying and has all these other, like it just like sort of went way, and every year you see this list get like longer and longer and longer. So it's now very strong, and I think that that's just not what the data says. You know, there are some small early life benefits. There's some benefits to babies in the NICU around digestion. You know, maybe some benefits around eczema early on, but all of these long-term things, like your baby's going to be smarter, they're going to, you know, have better health in these various ways. None of that seems to be causal at all. And this, that set of facts is basically why I wrote Crib Sheet, which is my second book, which is about babies. Because I got so much of people coming and saying, you know, I feel so terrible about not being able to do this, or this is like just not possible for me, or people writing to me saying, you know, my wife is like just killing herself to do this, and she is so unhappy, and like, is there anything? And people would write, they'd be like, my wife really trusts you. She liked your pregnancy book. Like, she really trusts you. Could you tell her that it's okay to quit? Yeah, I was like, yeah, okay, I'm going to write this other book about this, because the truth is, like, it is okay to quit. Like, you know, it's fine to try. You might like it, but it is not the thing that is going to make you a good parent. And this is a place where I really worry about the messaging we're sending people.
Yeah. So, like, I have a relative who loves to look just to page through horrible medical textbooks.
Fantastic.
And it's
but
not
they're great
good
at parties.
Yeah. And and I feel like so much, particularly because of the monetization issues these days, so much of the internet is that sort of on steroids, right? Because you're trying to feed engagement. Like, do you think that just like new moms or expectant moms just put the Google down?
Oh, the Google is fine. I don't think people, Googling is not always the best way to get the answers to your questions. I would prefer that they go to my website and ask the answers to the questions. But I think the truth is, if you are Googling something, actually it's already okay, because you are looking for an answer and you are like in a position where you are evaluating a question. So you're able to, like, you're a little bit more primed to sort of think about, okay, I'm going to engage with the content that's coming and like think about it. You know, I'm asking a question that I want to pursue the answer to in like a serious way. Where I think it is terrible for new parents and for pregnant people is when they are in their social media apps and this information is like thrust at them in a moment that they are not ready for it.
Yeah.
So you're pregnant and someone just all of a sudden shows up in your feed and says, you know, did you know that like GMOs are everywhere and they're ruining your baby's, you know, reproductive system? And did you wear perfume? Endocrine disruptors. Blah! And it's like, I don't even know half the words you're saying. I'm not in a position to evaluate this endocrine disruptor you're discussing. Like, I'm not ready for this. And now I'm just freaked out. And I think it happens to new parents all the time. You know, I'm just trying to like scroll through cat videos or whatever. And then somebody's in there telling me, you know, when you drop your baby at daycare, they think you died. And it's like, I'm not in a position to evaluate that statement right now, but boy, am I afraid of it.
So I'm just kind of curious. So one of my favorite books is by Paul Bloom, former head of the psychiatry department at Yale, called Just Babies.
He was my neighbor.
Was he really?
Yeah. When I was growing up, he lived next door.
Oh, he's a frequent guest on this podcast. We're big Paul Bloom fans here. And his book, Just Babies, and I always have to add this disclaimer, no babies were harmed in the writing of that book, but it's all about experiments on basically babies to like 3-year-old, 4-year-old toddler kind of thing. Not 4, but maybe 3. And one of the things I love about the book is that it completely just nukes from orbit the blank slate thing. right?
Yeah.
Is that the way I always put it is, uh, we come into this world with a lot of factory preset programming, but we need updates, right? Um, and I'm curious, do you like the blank slate thing is one of the most enduring sticky ideas in Western civilization, and it's just wrong.
Right.
Is that part of the reason why you get the anxious moms with the spreadsheets, is because they think they've basically got this fresh piece of paper and they can draw whatever they want on it?
No, I don't think so. So for one thing, I think anyone who is, what's sort of interesting about the persistence of this blank slate idea is that anyone who is a parent knows that's stupid.
It's
Because
crazy,
you only, and particularly anyone who has more than one child.
Yeah.
Right. The idea that somehow like you could achieve the same thing with these two, like that's almost always obvious from like day two.
Yeah.
You're just like, oh, this one's not like the other one. Like the other one had that. This is like, forget it. Like they're not the same. So I think it's like people rarely think that. I believe there's two things that are driving some of this kind of more obsessive behavior. One is just, for a particular set of people who are used to the idea of like inputs and outputs, and having control over the success or failure of your enterprises. Let's take my own case. Okay. So like I went to high school, and like my goal in high school was to get into Harvard. And I worked and worked and worked and worked, and I got into Harvard. And then my goal after Harvard was like get into grad school. I worked and worked and worked, and I got into grad school. Then I wanted to be a professor. I worked and worked and worked. I got to be a professor. Like most of the things that I tried to achieve in my life, if I worked hard enough, I was able to control them. And I think there's a lot of people who have that sense of like, I worked to get into college, I worked to get the promotion, I worked to, and then we have kids, because that is like for this set of people, that's like the order of events. And then you have a kid, and there's this idea that like, if I work hard enough, I'm going to also achieve this. And it's not even really clear what people like, how people would say the thing they want to achieve, but there's some sense in which like, I could win this. Mm-hmm. Like I could get into the Harvard of baby having. Mm-hmm. And to do that, I must work, because that is how, so sometimes I think people are just looking for work. Like I'm just looking for, when our first kid was born, we recorded the length of every breastfeeding session for like 3 weeks. And like we had a spreadsheet, and we had like a computer in the room. We would like have this number. My husband was always like, you're only putting round numbers. Is it always round numbers? Fuck you. That's it. But there's this sense of like, sort of, I'm trying to work at this. And of course it doesn't really deliver in any of these ways. So I kind of think that's a big piece of it, is just a feeling of like, somehow in order to achieve this, I need to work at it. And then working at it gives me a feeling of control, which of course is ridiculous because we don't have much control, but it's hard to accept that lack of control. And so we sort of respond to it by working.
So it's funny. The kind of people you describe are very familiar to me. I live in Northwest DC, grew up in New York, and I know a lot of super hard charging, professionally accomplished women who then have babies, and they take those skills as you describe, and they turn it to raising kids. And but we should sort of acknowledge is that you are talking about a significant but not necessarily the typical American woman or typical American mom, right? I mean, this kind of stuff is sort of an upper quintile kind of phenomenon.
So I think this stuff is. And then I think the thing that is more universal at the moment is this feeling of like fear that I'm messing it up.
Yeah.
And that's different from like, that's the response that people have to that is not, I'm going to make a spreadsheet. It's just like, I'm afraid. And I think there's a kind of it's not the same thing, but there's an overlap here between, the sort of most extreme form being like, I'm just going to try to control everything and do everything exactly right. But then it bleeds into people being told, if you tell your kid to put their shoes on and get out the door, you're rushing them. You're going to give them hurried child syndrome and turn them into, this is a real thing. I'm not making this up. You're going to give them hurried child syndrome, and you're going to give them anxiety forever. And then some people, and many people hear that, people across the spectrum
Yeah.
hear that and they think, shit, I got to get to school. But like now I can't get to school. And so instead I have to, do something else. Otherwise I'm going to, screw up my kid forever. And I think that's a kind of more universal experience.
Yeah. I also I haven't thought about it much, but it seems to me that in sort of the same way, social media is such a bane of our existence these days, in that you have a lot of high dollar people or high net worth people who are curating their social media presence to make it seem like they're just having the greatest time ever, and they're always in Stad or Greece or something like that.
Sure.
The kind of women who do have the spreadsheets, they probably are also disproportionately in the influencer set in terms of some of the signals they're sending out to moms closer to the median income, and they make it look all so easy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole sort of
the
point
piece
of
of this is like a little bit outside, but the piece of this I think is like really quite insidious, is this idea that somehow we've gotten to this place in the like mom influencer where like you it has to seem like you're doing it all by yourself.
Yeah.
And so then there are these people who are like, well, you're and you're so successful, like you have a job and you have this and you have all these kids and what, and you're making all their own clothes, and like also like you don't have any help, and maybe some of those people don't have any help, but I am fairly confident that's not true.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, I mean, so Charles Krauthammer used to make this point all the time about how income and better health outcomes are highly correlated for a very long time.
Yeah.
Until you hit a certain point, and then they actually work in opposition to each other. And his example was someone like Michael Jackson or Steve Jobs. The second you can afford to get the diagnoses that you want, you start getting really bad healthcare.
Right.
And it seems to me like one of the things it's worth pointing out to people is that there are a lot of these super famous, very rich, mostly like movie star types who end up having really messed up kids. And it's not for a lack of resources or help. It's just that it's like they're letting other factors dominate, parenting. And I kind of go back to my mom. It's like, just make sure you love your kids and make sure they're well fed, and you've gotten about 80% of the job done, right?
Totally. Yeah. And I think that, as our kids, like, kids are complicated, and as they get bigger, they end up like a very weird aspect of parenting is, as your kids get older, like in some ways they need less of your time because they're not, physically attached to you, but in some ways they need more of your time. And I think that's actually a very hard thing to kind of get quite right. Is, how am I going to be there for my kid? And when they're older and they hate me some of the time, but then they also want me to be there in the 5 minutes a day that they want to talk to me.
Yeah. I mean, I give that advice to people all the time, is that quality time is great if you can actually figure out what that is and when it is.
Right.
But the reality is it's quantity time. It's like, I used to bring my daughter on business trips with me just so we would hang out, because you don't know when they're actually going to listen to you. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's and they want to be around you for only a little while.
Yes. I pick up my kids from all of their cross country meets. Which is kind of disruptive, but does mean I get like a bunch of time in the car, and like time in the car with your kids is like for me, that's the best thing. You're not looking at them.
Yeah.
And that's like a good, just putting your kids in the car is always a benefit.
So on not to move into rank public policy stuff here, but there are long and heated arguments about daycare, about child tax credits, all these kinds of things. Do you have strong positions on any of them? Do you think that some of them are, because like, I think I don't want to get into the I'm pro fertility. I want people to have more kids. I want people to have the number of kids they want to have.
Yes.
But I think people should want to have more kids than a lot of them do. Right. And that's just my opinion. But like, I think it's true. Like, my biggest regret is we only have one kid. And I think people should have babies earlier than they did. And one of the ways to do this, like Brian Kaplan makes this point in his book, is to convince particularly the moms that it's not a life sentence. Like, it's not as incredibly hard. You're not going to screw it up if you don't put yourself 1,000% into it. And and that it's really rewarding. And so I have no problem with public policies that encourage that. I'm just skeptical. Every time I look at the pronatalism stuff, the results are very
Poor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some basic, like I have sort of two like kind of economic views on this, or like sort of data based views on things I think we should have. So I think not having any federal paid leave is weird and terrible. I mean, I think, we have a lot of evidence that paid leave is beneficial for the health of kids. I'm not sure that it would make people have more babies. I think it would just improve the outcomes for the babies and parents that we have. So I that feels to me like a total no-brainer. I actually also think there's a fairly strong case for subsidies in childcare for some of the same reasons that we have subsidies at school. I think that market is just not functioning well, and it's not functioning well because there are some, reasonably sized externalities associated with basically keeping mom in the labor force over that period. And as a result, when we have an externality like that, I think we do need to sort of think about subsidizing from one of the two sides. Like the market is basically just failing. And there's like, even people who are willing to pay, you can't find a way to pay because not enough people are willing to pay, because actually like the alternative is mom staying home. But that has a sort of externality long-term, because then she's out of the labor force and she doesn't get back in, or she gets back in at a lower wage. So I think there's an argument for subsidizing childcare as a kind of public policy. Neither of those things, in my view, is going to is going to increase the number of kids that we have overall, or at least the data would not suggest that those factors are very important. It feels to me like the two things that are, potentially important are, one, as people have pushed childbearing to older ages, they're more likely to need help with it. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about, how can we help people conceive when they are starting at 36, and how we can help them, and that's both, I think IVF subsidies are one thing there, or like, insurance coverage of IVF. But I actually also think there's a kind of more like, we can help people understand a bit better how this works. And there's some things that you could do to like set yourself up for more success fertility wise, that a lot of women sort of find themselves at 36 only now like learning about how the menstrual cycle works, mm-hmm. And how, sperm works and stuff. And like, you can teach people that earlier. But I mean, for me, I'm sort of curious how you feel about this, but like, I think we've done a better job telling people how hard it is to be a parent than we have trying to convey the like incredible, like magical joy of what it is. Like the sort of experience of being a parent is not like anything else. It's not like how you feel about your dog, but like more, it's hard to describe how spectacular and special and weird and like, just like that the way you feel about your kids, like that's great. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time, even as a person who does this all the time, talks about this all the time. Like I have a hard time explaining this to people. Like it's just the greatest, like crazy life experience. And I sort of think that's why you should have it. But I don't know that we've done a good job.
Yeah. I always tell people, all the cliches are true. It's gross. It's sticky. It's hard. It's exhausting, and it's totally worth it.
Yes.
And Russ Roberts.
It's a wild problem.
It's a wild problem.
It's right? A wild problem. And I mean, I love that Russ Roberts stuff.
Yeah, and he quotes. I've written about it. There's a philosopher that he relies on who calls it the vampire problem, which is which I'm not saying parenthood is like being a vampire, but like there are certain choices that once you make them, you can't unmake them because they change you, right? And I've had this problem with some of my more sort of libertarian friends who are like, who they heap scorn on things like phrases like meaning, right? Because they were like, if you look at the polling on happiness research, it's not necessarily true that parents become more happy or the increase in happiness doesn't blah, blah, all these kinds of things. And then you say, well, yeah, but they say that meaning goes way high. He's like, yeah, but what is meaning? No one knows what that means. And it's like, well, no, the people who have it know what it means. And because it's difficult to explain to people who don't have it what it is, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And the so my friend Arthur Brooks, he has this whole thing about earned success, right? He got it from Seligman or whoever was at Penn. And it's one of the only sources of actual life satisfaction, right? Real joy, and it seems to me that the one place everybody can have a serious dose of earned success is by being a parent. Is because, like, the point of being earned success is being needed, about having people who will miss you if you were gone. And that is a daily thing as a parent. And I think that's huge.
There was at the end of last week, one of my children had their recently pierced earrings grow into their ear.
Oh dear.
Where like it got pulled in, and so like the earring was like inside the earlobe. You can cut this if this is too gross for your thing.
No,
what I will say is as a result of that, I had to take this child to the emergency room because that is where you get this fixed. And there was like a moment where I had to be holding the kid like on my lap, very still, while the doctor like lidocained the ear. And on the one hand, like that's a terrible moment because your kid's bleeding and they're screaming and you're at the ER and you have been there for quite some time. But also there is no like other kind of moment in your life where you think like, wow, no one needs me as much as this person, like right now.
Yeah.
Nothing else in my life is as important as like holding this person and kissing their head and telling them like, it's going to be okay. I have you. And that's like, I mean, I'm like, that's not an experience that you have any place else in your life. And it is for me, like those moments when your kid's vomiting or like when they really need you are so special. And then there are all the moments of joy when like something good happens and you can celebrate with them. But that feeling of being needed is very special and unique.
And I sincerely believe, whether you want to say it's spiritual or evolutionary or a mix of the both, it's fun. We are wired to want that, to have a thirst for it. And if you don't have it in your life, you may not know that you're missing it, but that's one of the things that I think you're missing. And I'm not saying parenthood is for everybody or anything like that.
No.
But all right, so one of my favorite scenes, you remember the TV show Mad About You?
Yeah.
Okay, with Helen Hunt and Paul Reiser,
sure.
right? Mm-hmm. So when the Helen Hunt character gets pregnant and they start having an argument about how they're going to raise a kid and all these kinds of things, there's this wonderful scene where she says, so you're saying that you just expect me to be the mom? And he's like, well, I'll help every way I can, but yeah. And she's like, so I'm the mom? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, no, wait, seriously, you think I'm going to be the mom? And he's like, yeah. And then she's like, holy crap, I'm going to be the mom, right? And she kind of freaks out. It's this really wonderful scene. And I always think about it because at the end of the day, whether you think it's fair or a boon or something of both, like the role of moms is just going to be different because they're moms, right?
It's different.
But we shouldn't leave dads out.
Should not leave dads.
So I'm just wondering, in all of this stuff, I understand that your primary market are anxious moms, and because they're going to be the moms.
Just to be clear, I think I have a pretty good dad market because I do data. So I think relative to other parenting writers, I pull in more dads.
Fair, totally fair. So like, what are like, if you for dads who, or for men who are going to be dads, what are the things that you think dads freak out wrongly too much about, or that they miss, or what is the most common advice you give to quote unquote expecting dads?
So there are a lot of parenting. The first year of parenting is very hard on marriages,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's hard for a bunch of reasons, which are difficult to avoid. Like everybody's tired, and there are fewer resources, and all of those things. I think in some ways the most important thing that dads can do, at least in that early period, is make sure that there are times that you are checking in. So people say, like, what's your number one piece of advice for, like, you know, if you're going to have a baby? It's like, schedule a meeting for 2 weeks after the baby's born, and then 2 weeks after. Like, I want you to have meetings where you talk about how things are going.
Yeah.
And mom, the person who has just had a baby, who is nursing all the time, who is probably barely sleeping, is not going to be in charge of scheduling that meeting. And if you are the person with slightly more rest, whether you are the other mom or the dad or whoever, you're like, this is your job to
Mm-hmm.
schedule the meeting and to really listen to, like, what's going on. I think that's, like, in some ways the most important place to be. And then I think there are more opportunities for people to try to, like, figure out how to hit equality, or at least hit,
I'm
if
glad
not,
you put equality after hit. I was trying to figure out where you're going with it.
like, get to equality, or get to something that feels like everyone is being respected and like everyone is doing the amount that they want.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least, everybody is equally unhappy with how much they're doing, I guess. So I think the biggest problems that are arising in people's marriages is just this feeling of, like, I'm doing everything. And we probably need more work on our marriages before we have kids, but then there are opportunities to work on them after too.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that, there's good, at least there used to be, maybe it's been overturned, good social science data about how men become much more productive workers after they have their first kid.
Yeah.
And I think some of that is caveman must provide for tribe stuff. And some of it is that the only excuse that most moms will tolerate from
So I have to
men
work.
about not being there to help out is, honey, I got to work. I got to provide. I got to do this. Right. And so I think a lot of men throw themselves into their work to avoid the diapers. And also that evolutionary biology kind of thing about providing kicks in really strong.
I do think people could, like, one of the things that I think often happens, which can be combated, is that early on, mom is doing more. And then we develop this sense that, like, I think a lot of men develop a sense that they can't do it. Like, they're not doing it right, that whatever. I just would always want to remind people, like, learning by doing is a really important feature. And yeah, like, the first time you do the diaper, you suck at it. And so did she. 3 weeks ago, mom didn't know how to put on a diaper either. And now she's put on a lot of them. But, like, you too can learn to put the diaper on, and you too can learn to do all these other things. And just giving, like, for women, sometimes giving our partner a little grace about, like, the fact that they put the diaper on wrong, but also for partners, for men, kind of saying, like, you can definitely do this, and, like, it is worth investing in learning it, because it will be easier the second time and the third time.
Yeah.
My husband used to not load the dishwasher, and now I'm not allowed to load the dishwasher because I'm terrible at it.
I help by putting stuff in the dishwasher wrong, and then it takes much less time for my wife to reorganize it the way she likes it.
Oh, I think it takes him more time. I'm often told, sometimes my husband's just like, step away, stop. I told you not, stop it.
Yeah, I mean, some of this is bringing back painful flashbacks to, 20 years ago when we had, the Rugrat. But, like, I think that there's the coming up with the bi-monthly meetings makes a lot of sense, because I think, so I'll give you an example that has less to do with parenting. But so I grew up in the Upper West Side of Manhattan in the 1970s and 1980s, right? So of a certain milieu. My wife grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska.
Wow.
Different places.
Yeah.
And when we first got married, my wife didn't understand why I just wasn't a self-starter about, like, mowing the lawn and taking care of the grounds kind of thing. And I kind of had to explain to her that, look, if there were homeless crack addicts sitting on the front steps of our house, I would know exactly what to do. But I've never mowed a lawn. I don't know this stuff. You need to ask me or tell me stuff. And this is, I would say, one of the most enduring forms of conflict in my marriage is I should just do.
Right.
And I'm like, I want to be asked or I want to be told. I don't mind following orders. I'm very intimidated by my wife. But I like there's a lot of stuff, and I think this really came up in early parenting, particularly for boys who grew up with no memory of with a different memory of the division of labor between their parents. It's like, just assuming I'm going to leap into this because I know what to do causes a lot of resentment on both sides. And so just having a conversation of what the division of labor is, or not having to ask every time, I think would be super helpful.
Yeah, and also I think that conversation allows you to then like allocate the entire task. So I think sometimes people are like, well, I'd be happy to do to do it. It's like, well, actually holding in my head that the task has to be done is like half the task.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we really need to allocate is the whole task to your job is the lawn. And that means like figuring out what one does with the lawn, deciding what to do with doing it. Those are all the things. The job is not, or maybe the job is just mow the lawn and somebody else's job is to decide what has to happen with the lawn. But I think that there's like an opportunity to sort of do this in the way we basically do it efficiently at a job, where you would say like, you are in charge of the lawn and you do the lawn.
Yeah.
And I'll do, the garbage or whatever.
Although I do think that men like quests, like men like to be given tasks to accomplish things. And so I think
the lawn's your quest.
Yeah, figure out a way to phrase it that way, you
are in charge of the great unknown of the lawn.
Yeah, it boils down to I end up division of labor.
Yard work. That's what I'm hearing. You're not good at yard work.
But I have zero problem being sent to the store. So I go to, I do a lot of the shopping. Jesse Waters says I'm not a real man because of it, but I can live with Jesse Waters' little opinion.
Some of these things are like, there is an opportunity to figure out what's hard for one person and what's easy,
what's less of a chore for some people.
Less of a chore. Like, my husband reads all of the school emails and forwards them to me with like, here are the 2 things you need to know. Because for me, like, I do not I have a mental block about doing that. Whereas I do all of the menu planning and all of the cooking because I don't actually find that hard. And for him, that's like a nightmare.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of, some of this is just figuring out, like, as I tell my kids, like, fair is not always equal. Like, there are sort of gains from trade in places where like it's such a service to me that he reads the emails. And I think for him, it's like, what are you talking about? That's like nothing. But like, I actually find that really like upsetting.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. I mean, comparative advantage is
a real thing.
Yeah, about and it's not just who's better skilled at something; it's who finds it a lighter lift. Right?
Totally. Exactly.
So you kind of got into it glancingly, but in the very little time we got left, when you're talking about women the mom influencers who make everything look easy, I don't follow them. I couldn't give you the single name of one of them, but every now and then, we will publish something about them, or it'll blow up into some sort of controversy, or I'll hear on NPR about how they're all Nazis or whatever. Yeah. But tradwives. And what do you make of it? I mean, like, just blanket. What's your opinion of the phenomenon?
I think there's an interesting social commentary here where particularly when people are feeling like, how am I possibly managing it? Like, I have a job, my partner has a job, we have these 2 kids, we're like running home at the end of the day, we're making spaghetti, we're like trying to get people in bed, that we're like collapsing on the couch and scrolling Instagram. Like, there is something very appealing about a person who is making her husband a meatball sub for lunch, and she's making the bread and she's making the cheese and she's making the meatballs and she's making the sauce and she's like assembling, and it's like a 9-hour activity, and then he's like, oh, this is delicious. Like, that's sort of, I think that feels, I don't think it's easier, but I think it sort of pulls on something that feels to us like it might be a sort of calmer life, and it's very beautiful and relaxing. And so I think that's part of what people find appealing about this kind of this sort of content space. And I mean, it's why I follow Ballerina Farm. I like that reel about the the cheese sandwich.
Yeah.
Interesting. But I also, it is a shame when then people feel like, oh, I should be able to do that, which like those people have a lot of help.
So, so do you know the essay "I Pencil" by Leonard Read?
No.
Okay, so in libertarian economics, it's canonical. It's a fantastic essay. It's one of the few things I'll reread from time to time, and it was written in the 1950s, and it's a very Hayekian thing about spontaneous order. And the basic thing is it's written from the point of view, the narrator is a pencil.
Okay.
And it begins with something like, I am an Eberhard and Faber #2 pencil, blah, 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 blah. And he says, nobody knows how to make a pencil. My paint comes from Delaware. My zinc comes from Indonesia. My wood comes from Canada. People of different religions, different faiths, different languages, different nationalities, all working seamlessly together to put the ingredients together to make a pencil. But even pencil manufacturers don't know how to make pencils. They just know how to put together the last 1%. And it's a deeply contextual, rich way of explaining division of labor and modern economies. And a few years ago, every now and then someone will do, there was a thing in the British Museum where there was iToaster, where a guy made a toaster from scratch. And it took him like 8 years. Because he like galvanized the rubber and made the copper wire, all that kind of crap. And then there was another guy who, you can find it on YouTube, who made a chicken sandwich from scratch and like literally raised the chicken.
Oh my God.
Made the mayo from eggs that were hatched, right? Cost him like $1,600 and took him, like 6 months or something.
Right.
Like that,
Sure. You got to raise the chicken.
Right. And so like, that's how I feel about a lot of the tradwife stuff.
Yeah.
Is like, it's almost economically illiterate not to farm out to the market some of these things. I mean, it's a fun weekend to make a loaf of bread from scratch and all that kind of stuff. But to live your life like that is actually, it's a kind of vow of poverty if you took it seriously, because autarky, economic autarky, is a form of poverty. Division of labor makes everything cheaper. And so my problem with it is less to do like how you want to live and how you want to raise your kids, or what your roles, what you think the proper roles of the genders are. I have my own opinions, but I'm not going to like try to impose them on people. I find some of that tradwife stuff, to the extent it's not bullshit and fake,
inefficient,
just wildly inefficient, and sending a really bad message about the highest, best use of women's time.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think it's like, it's best consumed at like the way you would, like, I don't know, consume like Little House on the Prairie or something. Mm-hmm. It's like sort of super interesting to know, like, what would it be like if you had to, like, in the long winter, you had to grind all of your own wheat so you didn't die of dysentery or whatever.
I love prepper stuff.
I love prepper stuff.
I think that stuff
is very interesting. But I think you're right that if we then sort of give the impression that it's somehow like morally or in some other way better to not use the market to like make our cheeses, like that's not the efficient way to make cheeses.
It doesn't make you a better mom or wife.
Not make you a better mom to make, or wife to make your own cheeses, or to like buy a meatball sub for your husband, or God forbid to send him out to get his own meatball sub. Yeah, I mean, that's like, what he's looking for right now.
I would rather, I mean, we cook a lot, but I would rather order in food from time to time and be able to have a conversation with my wife about a book that she's read that I haven't. But if she's spending all day grinding wheat,
she's not reading the book. Not reading the book. No. It's true.
All right. Is there anything just like
this is great.
Some mom out there who's freaking out? There's like, how could you not have gotten to X that you can think of?
I think we hit a lot of that stuff. So
okay.
I think we're good.
So with that, Emily Oster, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was a real pleasure. I hope you'll come back. I'm going to get a lot of feedback from my female colleagues about stuff I didn't get to, so great. I may have to have you come in and clean up my mess.
Would be delighted.
And we'll put links to all your stuff in the show notes. And thank you for joining the Dispatch.
Thank you.